question. It's like a sneeze. And so the syllables on the chig. Poochigian. Poochigian.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening. Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. Tonight, I'll be joined by critically acclaimed and award-winning poet and author, Poochigian. Aaron, I got it wrong, didn't I? Poochigian, Mr. Poochigian, earned a PhD in classics from the University of Minnesota and an MFA in poetry from Columbia University. His latest poetry collection, American Divine, the winner of the Richard Wilbur Award, came out in 2021. His thriller in verse, Mr. Either/Or, was released by Etruscan Press in the fall of 2017, and the sequel, Mr. Either/Or, All the Rage, is available now. You know, there's so much more that I could say about this accomplished man, incredibly accomplished man, but I'd like to bring him on instead so he can speak for himself. Aaron, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
I'm glad you're here. You can tell I'm already excited about hearing your work. Haven't had an opportunity to read your work. I want to talk about it. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, sir. What is poetry?
I'll give a brief introduction. The poem describes in the first section a hurricane that is descending slowly on Manhattan. Here it is off Cape Hatteras, in the center of the eastern seaboard. You, I should explain, are the hero of the novel. While you are snoring up a storm, your mouth ajar and drooling in the hours toward dawn, a real and raucous storm is going on east of Manhattan and a short flight south in the renowned graveyard of the Atlantic. Brisk as a race car, giddy, corybantic, its central swirl is scattering the doubloons of pirate troves across the ocean floor. Already arms of it have swung ashore at lonesome Cape Hatteras, breached the dunes, and turned the choicest real estate to water. Wake up! Wake up! There is a squall as wide as Texas coming for you. On you snore, dreaming your hands are out to catch a daughter, descending, squealing, a tornado slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we delve into that rich piece, what is poetry to you, my friend? What is poetry?
I always think about it in terms of magic and incantation, that there is the normal world we operate, the world in which we speak prose and send emails and have to sign contracts and sign up for health insurance. And then there is this special space for language. And in magic, it's usually represented, you draw a sacred circle, a circle on the ground, and that marks off everything that's outside the circle from inside the circle. And inside the circle, magic can happen. And is the word incantatory, the tone that people use when uttering the words of a spell. And it is not the tone or even the rhythm one uses in normal language, but it sets apart what is being said as special, as magic. I could go on explain. I'm working on an article talking about poetry in the 21st century, and I was talking about drama That is lines spoken by actors on stage. And there is realistic drama on the one hand, in which characters talk. Actors do their best to talk like we talk, act and talk in normal life. And then on the far side, there are musicals and operas. And then I place poetry in the middle in this special space between highly emotive and usually focused on just one theme, songs in a musical, say, and then real life prose on the other. And poetry's there in the middle, and it has the mixture of the heightened emotional sense from musicals and opera, and it has the subtlety and the versatility of the language we use every day.
It was wonderfully described. So why is it important? Why is it important, poetry?
For me, it's always been important as just sort of, the defining reason in my life. I had a special experience when I was 18. I remember I was looking at the words of a poem in Latin. I didn't know Latin at the time, but It was like every synapse in my brain fired at once, and I could feel the lightning jumping from lobe to lobe in my brain. And since then, I just knew then I was going to write poetry for the rest of my life, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, usually for poorer. And so for me, it's always been that sort of trying to recreate that heightened experience. But in general, and this applies, not just to me, but I would like to say to everyone in the world, that it gives readers a special reading space. People are different in their reading lives than they are in their normal lives. And that's why I'm always so interested to find out when I meet different sorts of people, what sorts of literature they like. It's like you're learning their other half. You're learning their secret history. And so literature in general provides a space, right, in which people can explore desires and fantasies and, alternative lives they might have led, right? But poetry, in particular, is important in that it gives not only a compressed space for that, but also a space for heightened emotions. That is, we can't go around expressing heightened emotions all day long because, who knows, we might be thrown in the loony bin and we would make people very uncomfortable. But poetry creates a space in which we can have extreme and certainly heightened emotions, right? We can know what that experience is, and it's a safe space for us to explore that in. And so all of those reasons, I think that poetry is an important. If I may go on just for a little bit more, in this same piece I'm working on, I was writing about verse novels for young adults, the YA verse novels, which are very, very popular. Verse novels for adults do sell okay, but they've blown up for teenagers. In particular, there's by Elizabeth Acevedo, there's the poet X, which has been very popular, and then a verse novel by Kwame Alexander called The Crossover that actually has been made into a Disney Plus TV series. And those verse novels are particularly important for teens in that they do provide that private space that teens need as they differentiate themselves from their parents and from their peers and as they work out what sorts of people they're going to be as adults. And so I see poetry as being important for that reason, not just for teenagers, but adults as well.
All right. I'd also like to go back to the words of magic and incantations that truly intrigued me. Tell me more about those two words as they relate to poetry.
Yes, when I had that first sort of epiphanic experience with just mumbling poetry in Latin that I didn't even know, it was, to me then, just a stream of sound. I didn't know what the words meant. But with the rhythm of the poetry. I'll actually recite those lines in Latin. Armo virum quecano, Troiaeque primus aboris, Italiam fato profugus, lavineque venit. That's how they go in Latin. I didn't know what that meant, but it didn't matter, right? In that I recognized both that there was a certain elevation going on, right? That language was doing something that I'd never heard it do before. And secondly, that it was because of its very rhythm that allows for some repetition and some substitution within that repetition. Yes, as I said, incantatory and borderline hypnotic. There's a technical word that scholars use, hypnagogic. I won't throw that one around very often. I don't throw that one around very often, I promise. But it means leading to a hypnotic state, hypnagogic. And as I reflect on that experience, I always try in my own tree, to create a similar, hypnagogic experience for readers. And I associate that, with, being in a sort of otherworldly state, a non-normal, magical state.
You shared about high school, your experience. One of the questions that I ordinarily ask is, please share with us an experience, an early experience where you learned that poetic language has power. Is there anything else prior to high school where poetry stood out in your thinking?
It did early on for me. My parents got me, it was kind of funny. They purchased for me a translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. I was too young to read it, and actually it was in a Harvard edition that was published in like 1930. And so the language was really lofty and really archaic. It was a really clunky, awful translation, frankly, right? But it was the very foreignness of the words. And also, I'm willing to say this because I was very young at the time, like 13 or 14, the font, even the archaic font, and then there were a number of really spooky drawings by Gustave Doré. And all of that, was important to me as a sort of alienated teenager, right? It was especially numinous, like the sense of the divine, to me when I was very young. And also, I guess since then, I try, I want to know all the words. I don't know all the words. Every day I discover words I don't know, especially because I don't cook. Words that are involved in cooking, like technical vocabulary. I don't know the cooking vocabulary well. Also, words for fabrics, all those words for fabrics, I still am learning those. But that early experience with that alienating, archaic translation made me want to try to learn as many words as I could. And also gave me a sort of fondness for quaint and at times slightly archaic words. I'm fond, like just last week I discovered, I knew this word, but I didn't know the origin, the word dearth, D-E-A-R-T-H. Dearth, it just means a lack of things. But I found this out. I love etymologies and word origins. It actually was originally, it comes from German. It was originally just the abstract noun for dear, our word dear, like I love you, dear. Originally that means expensive, and dearth meant expensiveness. And then I kept digging, and it meant expensiveness, that food was expensive because there wasn't any food supply. And so eventually it just comes to mean a lack of food for everybody. But originally it meant expensiveness. And I just dote on weird, archaic words like that. And I've been trying, I guess we can bring this back around to Mr. Either Or, to deploy those rare, archaic words strategically. Of the the kinds of poetry I write, Mr. Either Or is the most accessible. I guess we can call it the most popular-oriented of the works that I write. And certainly, the main character, Hugh, he's just a 23-year-old dude, and he has no interest in school. And so I'm not going to use all those fancy, poetic, archaic words. I'm not going to put those in his mind or in his mouth often. But other characters will use them, especially villains, when they want to sound super sophisticated and creepy. And so I put dearth in the mouth of one of the bad guys. Okay.
What I'd like you to do for me, I'd like you to share again your opening piece, please.
All right. One moment. This is A is for Alfred.
All right.
Who is this massacre in embryo? The sea's bad seed, the son of suck and spin, the bastard offspring of our present rage? Reluctant for the moment, he will grow voraciously off Cuba. Weathermen will name him Alfred comes of age. Destined for greatness, he will carve a path through the renowned graveyard of the Atlantic, westward into our continental shelf. How perfect that a migrant child of wrath will lash the wrathful USA itself. Coasts will be lost, metropolises, frantic lubbers will suffer from the mal de mer. See now the future, as if CNN were playing it before your vision live. A fetal revolution in the air, expanding, going Category 5, going for blood, going American. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. The second time I was ready for it. That was ready for it the second time. That's why I always like hearing the choice. Wow. Aaron, what was the purpose of that piece? What were you attempting to convey?
Well, as in poetry, like in lyric poetry, there's usually some outside personal motive, but it's strange. I learned in writing a novel and that you have to accomplish all kinds of narrative goals. But in this one, I guess in my mind, there was a great deal going on. I wanted to set up both the hurricane and the pregnancy of the main female character, Li Ling Levine. Yes. She is the girlfriend of the main male character. And throughout that first section of the novel, the fetus growing inside of her is a little hurricane. And the hurricane in this section is like a fetus. It's just a tropical depression, like we have right now, tropical depression Brett, which is moving up towards Cuba. And so it will grow eventually into a hurricane. And there's a lot of interplay back and forth between the hurricane and Li Ling's pregnancy throughout that first section. And it is kind of scary. And in reflecting on, that connection between the hurricane and the pregnancy, actually just before the show, I mean, I realized that it's particularly resonant for me in that, I mean, I have never gotten married and I don't have any children. Certainly there's a curiosity about what my life would be like if I had done that. And there's certainly a great deal of anxiety on my part. And so it does become very personal. Anxiety at the prospect of being responsible for children. So that's all in there. And then also in terms of, the hurricane moving in as a migrant on America, I don't want to get political, but certainly I wrote that section under our former president, and it was actually right around the time that there was a great deal of tension at the border in that former president was separating migrant parents from their children, sometimes infants. And so, yes, that all made its way into that opening section as well.
What inspired the book?
When I first wrote Mr. Either Or, I wanted to write a contemporary American epic. I guess I should say I felt there was a need for it in literature, and also in terms of my development as a poet. Right now in the 21st century, when we think about poetry, we mostly think of what I call lyric poems, fairly short poems, usually under 50 lines, and usually much less than that, right? That can be published on just one side of a page in, say, the New Yorker or a magazine like that. And when people think of poetry, mostly they think of lyric. But in the past, and this is a lot of poetry that I like, poetry can do all sorts of things. It can tell epics like the Iliad and the Odyssey. It can tell whole stories. It can teach complicated subjects. I read a poem in which Aratus, an ancient Greek poet, teaches astronomy, and certainly it can leap from the mouths of actors, right, in, say, Shakespeare. And so I wanted, for my own sake, and also because I think it's good for literature, to try to recover narrative poetry for the 21st century. And that, for me, meant doing it in genre fiction and writing something. Originally, I conceived of these verse novels as epics, and in a way that would be a reflection of our American culture, like the Iliad is supposed to capture Bronze Age Greek culture. So I wanted my Mr. Either Ors to capture American culture at the time they were written, its values, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to share before we continue this part of the journey that I'm from the South. I hail from the South, and for me, it's either instead of either. So if I go back and forth between two, it's not. It's
Fortunately, I never use either or either in a rhyming position.
Okay, all right, man, all right. I'm going to throw it out there. So with that in mind, the title, tell me about the title. How did you come about choosing it?
Oh, very well. So there is a Danish philosopher named Søren Kierkegaard, and I stole the title for him. He wrote a philosophical work simply called Either or Either or. And in that, he lays out two different tracks for life and two different personality types. The aesthetic, or the aesthete, who's interested in arts and sensual pleasure, and then the ethical life on the other, and that person recognizes commitments and duties and obligations. And as Kierkegaard presents it, it's one or the other. And so in the course of these novels, then the main character, Mr. Either Or, goes from, having no obligations other than his job, to suddenly having a wife and something to fight for besides himself, and then eventually in this last section of the new novel, All the Rage, having a daughter he has to protect as well. And so he goes from the either to the or. And then also it refers to simply the main character's, he is a spy. And so he has his regular identity. And then on the other hand, he has his or identity as a, super spy.
All right. Please share more from your work.
All right. This is a section also from the first Hurricane unit. And so here, you, the main character, are running up Broadway in Manhattan. All the subway trains have been shut down because of the hurricane, and the city has been evacuated. And so you have no choice but to run home to try to save the life of your girlfriend, Li Ling Levine. Desolation. No cabs to take, no cars to jack, and so adrenal in the driving rain. You are running north to the rescue, stud. Fast as you are, though, you feel defeat hard on your heels. That harpy threatening Li Ling's life won't let her keep it. You've got to go and give yours anyway. Die, too, for your darling. Desolation. No gull is here to gape at you going through old Manhattan all alone. No Norway rat to note the splat of soggy Converses on soaked sidewalks and flooded streets. The Strand bookstore bobs by on your right with boards on its windows, and soon to your left, lights out and shuttered, Chase Bank and Brenner's chocolate bar. General Washington, who won his war, is sitting in stirrups astride a steed in Union Square, while you, a young campaigner of note, a promising patriot, must face on foot a final failure. Guilt, what you've gotten your girlfriend into, wells up on Broadway near the Brooks Brothers. By the time you turn on 28th, you want what's coming, Wicked One. Thank you.
Oh, wow. What do you hope readers gain from encountering your work, or this book in particular?
Yes, I certainly, for other works that I've written, I do feel that there is, if not, I hesitate. I don't try to teach anything with the works that I write, not in the traditional sense, at least. Mm-hmm. I do try to impart some kind of information. But these works I made primarily to be blatantly escapist. That is, and that is part of the reason I put them in the second person. That is, mm-hmm. I wrote, rather than using I or he, I used you, so that the reader is forced, in a way, to identify with this main character and become this roughly, early 20-something dude. His ages slightly during the course of the novels. Yes. And so the intention was primarily to be blatantly escapist. And part of it also was to encourage the escapism, was to create in literature, and hopefully literary literature, something along the lines of a literary video game. And so when one plays a video game, often they're called first-person shooter video games, one looks through the eyes of one's character. And usually the first thing that character does at the beginning of the game is look in the mirror so that you know what your character looks like. And then that doesn't happen again. And you go on looking through the eyes of your character. And so I wanted this to be like that, immersive like that, and blatantly escapist. Partly for the reasons we talked about before, that literature allows people to explore lives and emotions and characters who are other than themselves, and to decide, do I want to be more like that? Am I happy to stay the way I am? Do I want to meet more people like this character or that character? And in that sense, certainly, literature is educational. And so I wanted to take that tendency of literature and push it into overdrive in these novels by using, the second person and the immersive.
Please share another section.
All right, I'll give you one of the villains. And so this is a moment in which our main villain, Stavros Canard, who is basically he's an anarchist. He just wants to create chaos in the world. And this is his origin myth. Explains why he likes causing chaos so much. It describes him as a young man. At this point, he has the flash drive that has the all-important information on it, and so he thinks he's won, and he's very, very happy. Let's turn now to the happiest man on earth, the least removed that he has been since birth from perfect bliss. Stavros Canard admires trees that have toppled from the boulevard and dropped on cars, storefronts and upper stories. He giggles through a windshield at live wires writhing and smashed glass, every poignant shard, and sodden lumps of vermin, and the glories of mud on streets, and promising young fires in high-rent towers. Such joy he feels, such joy on this the morning of his great success. Like any child, he loved to make a mess. Hyper at choir practice, he would sing off pitch on purpose. He dismembered toy heroes while cackling in ecstasy. Still, he was just a naughty little boy, a brat, a nuisance. He was not yet strange. Then came his sexual awakening. One day, alone, he felt intense arousal while watching a tsunami on TV. Then Stavros hankered to do more than tousle a playmate's well-combed hair and disarrange the volumes in the public library. So he began his villainous career, fomenting anarchy in gay Paris, had triumphs and defeats year after year, and then this morning, like a hedonist anticipating just before a tryst, a gonzo Eden of ecstatic sex, he revels in the prospect of a welter of ruinous, dystopian effects, reducing humankind to free-for-all infighting, feud and famine, helter-skelter. This is the world he itches to be in. He is the cure. He is the wrecking ball. He is the happiest that he has ever been. Thank you.
Oh, the way you read, the way you read, you remind me of Orson Welles when he was reading at the Mercury Theater. You really do. So what I want to know, because I can really tell you enjoy what you do in terms of sharing your work, what is the relationship between your speaking voice and your written voice?
Unfortunately, well, it's a blessing and a curse. I have a really loud outside voice, and I do get shushed on occasion because my voice is kind of big. But also my internal voice is really, really loud like that too. And so I hear my own voice in my head. It's kind of, I don't know, for better or worse. And so they're very close. I'd actually never thought about that before. But I imagine as I am composing, I guess there's very little difference. And I actually, this will be interesting. I belong to a writing space in Manhattan called Paragraph. Writers go there to do their work. It's like a gym membership. You pay a monthly fee, and then you get 24-hour access to this writing room. But there's the quiet space in which nobody can make any noise whatsoever, and people just type away. And then there's the cafe area where people can talk and get coffee and stuff. And I end up working in the cafe more, and I realized it's because I mumble to myself as I'm writing. And so as much as possible, I try not I guess when I'm working, I do this. I've only realized this lately, not just to be words floating in my head that I then type out, but in every way I can, I try to make what I'm writing audible or even palpable. And so almost obsessively, I'll print out a section that I've written, and sometimes I'll do, other poets talk about this, a cut-up. I'll take it apart line by line with scissors, and then I'll play around with rearranging the lines, and that makes the experience of composition tactile as well. And so I guess from the very origin, there's an aural, the ear-oriented aspect of the work, and that I try to make it palpable as well. And so different lean in different ways. Some emphasize more the visual, and others emphasize more the auditory. And I certainly belong to the second category. In that the way the lines are presented on the page are pretty traditional. It's rare that I'll do an artful line break or use spacing in some radical way, but I try to use sounds in a radical way.
So as you think about your work, this particular book, in terms of the poetic devices that you most employed, what would you say? What did you use mostly?
Rhyme I certainly use, and then also a fair amount of alliteration. In some instances, the alliteration is built into the form that I am using. I like, rhyme partly to get back to something we talked about before, because it enhances the incantatory effect of the verse, and then also you can use it end rhyme to link lines and to close off a section. And so it's part of the whole sonic organization, I would like to think, of a passage. But then alliteration, which is using the same consonant or vowel sounds. I'm sure you know, but I'm just giving you information for the general audience. In the action scenes, I use the meter of Beowulf. Old English Beowulf, which is actually written in what's called alliterative verse, 4 stressed lines in which you have to alliterate on 2 or 3 of the stressed syllables. And so in Old English, Beowulf begins, Huat weyardene in yeer daium of shield sheffing sheathina freatum. It just sounds amazing. And that worked well for the action scenes, in that I imagine them being, like I said, it's an old movie now, but being like the fight scenes in that movie, The Matrix, of which I'm very fond, in which they're not just fight scenes, but they're choreographed dance scenes as well. And so I like the variation between the more expositional sections, which are in rhymed iambic pentameter, and then the action scenes, which go switch to the meter of Beowulf.
Now, do you view yourself as being more of a storyteller or more of a wordsmith, or a combination of the two?
I've become more and more of a storyteller, but I guess I would have to come down on the side of wordsmith. Certainly, most of the books the other books that I've published have been collections of lyric poems rather than narrative poems. But what I want, I guess I want to use my wordsmithery, whatever I have of it, to write in every single genre of poetry. And I see those as being lyric and then narrative and then dramatic as well. And so I wrote a play in verse, but I wasn't happy with it. And so it'll never see the light of day. But I will try again. And I would like to try, I would like to see, I'll say, here on Broadway in New York City, a verse drama that's not Shakespeare, an original 21st century verse drama. And there are some sections, say, in the popular musical, Hamilton, that get pretty close. But that is still, it's a variation of musical songs, and then there are some rap sections. And people do talk a lot about how similar rap is to poetry, and I completely agree. But they're different in the sense that rap has a beat in the back, and then the person speaking the lines does variations on the rhythm over those beats. Whereas, as I see it in poetry, as opposed to rap, like spoken word or any kind of poetry, the poet has to both imply the beat and do the substitutions all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a brief break, but here's a question I'd like you to answer after the break. Just give you an opportunity to kind of think about it. When you write, how do I want to phrase this? You talked about the importance of escapism, all right? And it makes me wonder if it hurts you to write poetry. If not, why not? That's my question. We'll take a break, and we'll be right back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I am here with Aaron, and I will not butcher last name. So, Aaron, I don't want to do that. I don't want to butcher it. Pronounce it for me one more time, please, so that I'll know.
Oh, Poochigian.
Poochigian. All right. All right. Answer my question, please, sir. Does it hurt you to write poetry? If not, why not?
It hurts me once in a while, and those are the poems that they may not even be the most popular poems. You might not even end up thinking they're your best poems, but those are the poems that are most powerful for you, the ones that hurt you. And I had had a mentor in undergraduate school, and I was writing on a very personal subject, and he said, and I've never forgotten it, it's going to take a lot of tears before you get to the center of that onion.
Oh, all right.
And I've been trying to get to the center of onions in very personal poems where you just suddenly, you have no inhibitions about your own secrets, and you're willing to divulge all. And those are the poems that are agonizing, yes. But then in the end, when they come and you're done with them, it's kind of a great release. And so I compare those poems, the ones that are very personal and that hurt, writing those is what I imagine going through labor is like for a female, right?
Okay.
And that it is, yes, I've been told it's very painful, especially without an epidural, right?
Yes.
But then when you're done, there is this bliss, and there is an infant there as well, and great warmth and happiness. And so the ones that hurt, yes, are like going through labor. Other poems, I write on a variety of subjects, and they're not always personal. Sometimes writing a poem, it's true, it's more like an irritation, in that you have an itch, and you scratch and scratch and scratch at it until finally, got it. That itch isn't there any longer. And so the majority of poems for me are like that, scratching an itch and then finally being able to relax. And then once in a while, it's like going through labor.
All right. Okay. Please share some more of your work.
I will. This is another brief hurricane section about the storm itself hitting Manhattan. It's simply called Alfred in Manhattan. And before I begin, we were talking about childhood experiences with poetry, and
Yes.
there's one here as well. I'll mention this. The first section is called A is for Alfred that I read, and I should have mentioned this before. When I was like 5 or 6 and just learning how to read, I had this book called The A to Z of Batman. And it went through it was an abecedary, and it went through the whole alphabet, A through Z, and it talked about things that were relevant to Batman. And the first thing was A for Alfred, Batman's butler. And the last thing was Zoom for the sound that the Batmobile made. I still remember it to this very day. And so I always think of, the A to Z of Batman when I come across the name for this hurricane, Alfred. High up Manhattan climbs the angry sea. Goodbye, South Ferry. Goodbye, Battery. The harbor house has foundered. The whole park joined the dominion of the squid and shark. Pictures are bad. The Dow is going down. While someone's sloop, or is it Noah's Ark, without a helmsman, without flag or sails, is bobbing up canal in Chinatown. The trees that stand are writhing in the gales. Bicycles, chairs, trash cans, and signage, all loose things, lift off and wheel into a wall or spin away into the troposphere. If anarchy is hell, then hell is here. Thank you.
When you wrote this book, what were you thinking in terms of accessibility, and how important was accessibility to you? How hard should someone need to work to understand the sections in this book?
This is the most accessible of the works that I've written. In other more recent lyric poems, I've actually gone out of my way to include just once in a while. I don't use a lot of them. A really quaint moment when I'm trying to push the poem. But in this work, which I modeled both on, epic and on pulp fiction, I wanted it to be very, very accessible. And part of that is a reflection of the fact that, many of the sections are from the perspective of just the 23-year-old kind of dude. He's enrolled in college as part of his identity. Though he's actually a spy, but he's flunking out of school and he doesn't have any interest in it. And so I wanted this book in particular to be highly readable. I want readers to be able to buzz through it. And I've been told, thank goodness, that those readers who have reread sections, at least of the first either or, have found greater depths in it on rereading. But I wanted it to be, part epic and part airport novel, like you buy a James Patterson novel before you get on a flight and finish it before you're done. And so highly, highly accessible. And part of that is just a whole instinct that I have in my work, and part of what I feel is my responsibility for poetry. I don't want to point fingers, but for a variety of reasons in the 20th century, poetry lost a lot of popularity. It was still fairly popular in the 19th century, and there were best-selling poems and best-selling poets. But partly, and I understand and enjoy this poetry very much, but some instincts on the part of modernism and postmodernism pushed poetry away from the general audience. And the result, I don't want to get too much into it, is that largely now poetry, I see it as surviving only, I talk about it like endangered wildlife, right? That
Right.
poetry survives only in preserves, like endangered animals, and these preserves are academic institutions and MFA programs. And given that environment, the academic environment, poems are set up to be studied even before they are to be enjoyed. And secondly, then they're separate from the space that the general reader inhabits, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find books of poetry in the college bookstore library, and in the college in the college library and in the college bookstore, perhaps. But you're not going to find books of poetry in the Hudson News at the airport bookstore.
Right.
And so my instinct in making this book accessible was to try to push poetry beyond, it's not exclusive, but beyond academia, back out of the preserve into the wilderness, right? That the general reader inhabits.
Mm. Question for you: how long did it take to write this particular book?
This book came pretty quickly. I wrote it in about, it took about a year, about 6 months each section. There are two villains, and there's about 6 months between the two sections, and an infant is born between them. And that was comparatively quick. I would like to think that this is the sequel to the first Mr. Either Or, that I'd happened on a manner, a method that worked in the first, and so I was able to expand on that in the second, and that is the variation between the expositional rhymed sections and the action scenes in alliterative verse. But you know, that first Mr. Either Or, that took me about 10 years to write.
10 years.
And about 6 or 7 of those years were just unsuccessful experiments. And the problem with many verse novels, when poets try to do narrative, is that they lose track of the story and they actually lose themselves in details. They'll lose themselves in descriptive passages when they should, in fact, be advancing a plot. And so the instincts for a storyteller are often a completely different skill set from the instincts for a lyric poet. And I had to, so I would like to think, develop that skill set for narrative. And I did it in the following way. When I felt like I wasn't, I would get paragraphs or stanzas, that I liked, but nothing that really worked as a narrative. And it only started to work for me, that first Mr. Either Or novel, when I storyboarded out the whole plot. As, for example, people do when they're making a film. And they'll have the various scenes that have to be made. And then I told myself, because I wanted to be free as a poet, and I wanted at the same time to make sure I was advancing the plot. And I would open up a Word doc on my computer, just one page. I couldn't go past one page. And I would say, Aaron, you can go crazy as you want poetically, right? As long as you, in the space of this page, accomplish this one major narrative goal, right? And that way I was able to find a balance between being a storyteller and being, a lyric poet who wanted to be descriptive. And then once I finally got that method with the storyboard and the single-page Word docs, I was able finally to make progress on the first Mr. Either Or. And so I felt that for the second one, I would do that, but then I expanded on it in a couple of different ways, added more perspectives than that of just you, the main character.
What did writing both verse novels do to you as a thinker?
Poets W.H. Auden says, he said, talk about this in a long poem called The Letters to Lord Byron. They tend to be self-absorbed. He's generalizing himself, right? And they tend to to go for slick and easy generalizations, he says, slick and easy generalizations. And so when you are writing a verse novel, a novel, and you have all these characters moving about and interacting, you need to become a kind of psychologist. And so it was good for me. I very rarely write poetry, partly because of these verse novels. I rarely write poetry from my own perspective any longer.
Okay.
I'll either describe things objectively or I'll write in character voices. Part of this has to do with doing a lot of translation that I have done, and part of it has to do with these verse novels, in that it's part of the, I guess as I see it, the whole escapist venture I was talking about, suddenly having to write in the voices of characters who are not only not like you, but sometimes the exact opposite of you, and sometimes even, of course, of a different gender. And so it's really healthy for poets of whichever gender or orientation to do what I call writing in drag. That is where if you're a male, you write, for a while, a series of poems from a female perspective or a female from a male perspective. And I first discovered this trick, that it was healthy and good for my poetry in terms of broadening my horizons, when I translated the ancient Greek poet Sappho, one of the mothers of lyric poetry. And so I spent, a whole year and a half of my life writing from the very intense and passionate perspective of Sappho.
Okay. So are you saying that poetry does not have a sex?
I'm sorry, that it does not have a
sex. What is the sex of poetry? Is a question that I've often asked. What is the sex of poetry? Or are you saying that
got it.
Not have a sex? Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Hey, that's why they pay me the big bucks, Aaron. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
Wow, that's a really cool question.
Hey, and
it's really interesting to think about, given our current cultural discussion of masculinity or femininity, and other possibilities. That's interesting. In that Sappho, for example, whom I translated, though certainly very female, has a number of traditionally masculine ways of approaching and seducing other people. And then there are all of the cliches that go back even to ancient Greek poetry of male poets being effeminate, for example, for writing poetry at all. And so there is, in the whole conception of someone being female or male and writing poetry, at least going back historically, a fair amount of gender bending. And so there's a word from ancient Greek called epicene.
Right.
And it means of both genders. And so I will say that poetry is most certainly epicene and most certainly gender fluid.
Right. All right. Please share some more of your work.
All right. I will read one of the a section from the second half of Mr. Either Or. In that second half is there is a villain, Malachi Makan, and he, as the villain, he's a super genius, and he has read this Chinese text that predicts the end of the world. And he wants to bring that about for a variety of reasons, partly because he's been so mistreated. At this point, Malachi Makan has broken into your apartment where you live with Li Ling, and you've actually been shot in the shoulder, and you are down and out. And so your girlfriend, or now your wife, Li Ling Levine, jumps into action, and is actually strangling him. She has her arm up under his throat and is strangling him. And this section is what he sees, what he hallucinates as he is breathing his last breaths. A man and his dog. What Malachi Macan perceives while dying is not lost love or flickers from his youth, but foreign imagery that glows like truth, and he relaxes. In his eyes, 2 scrying crystals, there is a man, a failed believer, who keeps a junkyard in a desert place. The man is coughing, and his black retriever has jumped up on the bed to lick his face. The dog, he named it Bud, showed up one day and watched the man and begged, a curious stray, till scraps left out developed into trust, and mutual touch became a sort of love. Why here? Why them? What are they symbols of? Who knows? But now the junkyard man has died, and after 3 days lying by his side, Bud wanders off into the desert dust. The villain, choking, sees this, scene by scene, dies with it in his eyes. What does it mean? Except that even lost souls, in the end, deserve the love of someone. Call him man's best friend. Thank you.
Wow. You know, Aaron, I'm a retired professor of counseling, and we often talked about escapism as a mental health problem, potentially, because with escapism, you're primarily, quote, leaving the world or leaving whatever scenario, whatever situation it is, to find comfort in a fantasy world. But in a real world, we live in a world where there's good, bad, ugly, as well as indifferent. So what I'd like to know, sir, is what do you view as the role in modern-day society?
Wow. And yes, and in relation to escapism, certainly, I talked about how I would like to think that poetry opens up, to use more terminology from therapy, opens up a private and safe space for teens, for example, through those YA verse novels, to define their own difference from other people and to, define the sort of person they'll become as an adult. But it becomes different, I think. Literature becomes different for adults in that we are fully formed, and certainly as we get older, it often feels, I don't know if this is true, that it's harder and harder to change, to become some completely different person, or even to change a little bit seems increasingly difficult. And so even for adults, and it may have even more of an escapist role for adults who tend to be more set in their ways. Literature in general and poetry in particular, and I think with greater intensity, allows people who frequently, for a variety of reasons, aren't comfortable expressing intense emotions, or aren't in a situation in which they are free to do so, to have a full and rich emotional life. And that through exploring those possibilities, the different intense emotions one can have, and also different sorts of characters one can have, also even, to change, however slightly, who they are.
Now, has a poem you've written, maybe in this particular book, or the newest one, ever humbled or frightened you?
Yes, a number of times, and it happens most often. It happens for him in the second half of the book, and this is related to my own fear, when he has to confront fatherhood. He's had a fair amount of experience as a super spy, and he is pretty confident and indomitable. But when he has to, yes, both express emotion openly with Li Ling and confess that he loves her and that he wants to marry her. He is the one who proposes, though she is usually in charge. And then later on, yes, when in fact his pregnant girlfriend Li Ling in the first section is being held at gunpoint by one of the villain's henchmen. He is completely emotionally vulnerable and humbled, and whereas he's elsewhere never willing to give up and always ready to fight, he, in that instance, when he's forced to be recognize that he's a father and that he has responsibilities, he is willing to just give up and give his life in order to try to save his girlfriend. And then once towards the end of the second section, he has to choose between the man he is protecting. He's compared in a simile to a Secret Service agent protecting a president. He has to protect this man, and yet there is a villain in the room who's also threatening his wife and daughter. And so he's overwhelmed by the responsibilities that he has, both as, a hero and protector, and then also as a husband and a father. And so more than any of the villains humbling him, it is his paternal duties that humble him.
The most. Wow. We've reached the time in the program that I view as my personal favorite. I view it as being a mini poetry concert. This is an opportunity for you to share whatever you like without interruption from me. No questions.
All right, I will do so.
You. All right, you're on stage. Your turn.
Here we have, I will read this section. In the second section of Mr. Either Or, the Hudson and the East Rivers that surround Manhattan have been flooded with transformer oil. And there is then a girl, I feel like I know her. I gave her the name Claire Custer, but she's like a lot of people I know, and she bikes on top of the Brooklyn Bridge that connects the East River to Brooklyn, and she smokes a cigarette, and then she drops the still lit cigarette into the East River, and the transformer oil catches fire, and both of the rivers catch fire. Born and bred in Rocky Ridge, Utah, has ridden her beglittered bike through Chinatown and up the Brooklyn Bridge. Once at the top, she lights a lucky strike. A British friend has given her the pat and leans her forearms on the iron railing. Why is she blissful? Why at peace in spite of shattered freeways and the power failing? Because the big night sky at last is back. It's easy to forget how very black space is when one is reveling in the gaudy ecstasy of Manhattan every night. She squints a while, and scattered points of light gather themselves for her into Orion, the skewed head and interminable body of Draco, either bear, the swan, the lyre, even the dolphin, and the lesser lion. When her cigarette is almost done, she drops the still lit butt, a smidge of fire over the railing. Time to go to bed. But holy, an eruption has begun beneath her. There is rumbling on the water, and orange there. An exhalation hotter than any earthly breeze has singed the air. Just look at that. The liquid blaze has spread so far already up and down the river. Already flames have found the bars and stores that line the South Street seaport. Claire, oh Claire, you new Prometheus, you shy fire giver, why have you up and pedaled off instead of staying to admire this work of yours? Thank you.
Oh, wow. Will there be an audio version of this book? Any of your work?
I recorded an audio book, for Audible of the first Mr. Either Or, and I am in the process of negotiating for sound studio space at this very moment. And then also, I'm working on finding an audiobook producer. It is sort of like making a film. The producer I worked with for the first Mr. Either Or audiobook was a lot of fun. She was a voice actor herself and gave me a lot of suggestions. I worked on my voice to be an actor when I was done, but I'm not an actor. I have a great respect for them, real actors that spent their lives working on their trade. And so I'm somewhere between being a real actor and being a ham with a really loud voice.
All right. Question for you. You've written in so many different genres. Do you think you were meant to be a writer?
I'm sorry. I've written in so many genres, and
do you think you were meant to be a writer?
I have to say I do. It's sort of overconfident, perhaps, to say so. But, I couldn't have been anything else. After I had that experience when I was 18 reading those Latin lines, it was sort of, it wasn't even that I decided I was going to be a writer. It's that it was decided that I was going to be a writer. And my goodness, I'm 49 years old now, and I'm going to turn 50 on July 25th. And so, yes, it's been a rough ride, and I'll be honest, I have been pretty dang poor for most of my life. But I'm not. I don't complain about that very often, at least. I've had a fair amount of time to write, and I'm grateful for that. Given the sorts of jobs that I've had and the very low cost of living that I've kept, I've been very protective of my time to write. And so, yes, I don't have any regrets, but there are times, when the bank account gets low that I wonder, well, maybe I should have gone into computers. But those times are very few. And certainly, I did try to work in computers briefly and got restless and just wanted to be a poet again.
What surprises you most about being a writer?
I'm sorry, what's the thing I like the most?
What surprises you most about being a writer, a poet, again, translator? What surprises you most?
My goodness. What do I take home from it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
what the satisfaction I get?
Yes, in essence, yes.
My goodness. And so certainly I look at it now, certainly since I'm about to turn 50, partly there is daily pleasure certainly involved both in reading and reading other people's literature, rereading my own literature to make sure that I have it right. And then even in the process of writing, though we talked earlier about how it can be an itch to scratch or even like the painful process of going through labor, right? And so there certainly is satisfaction both on the completion of the work And then even in the process, there's knowing that one is doing what one's supposed to do, and that I've gotten more confident that I can, if I stick to it, usually get to a point where I'm satisfied with what I've written. But also, what I don't want to have, what I've always been really worried about, even since I was young, is that when I'm old, I don't want to have any regrets. That when I'm, on, say, my deathbed, I don't want to look back on my life and say, if only I had spent more time on my poetry. And so I spend a lot of time on my poetry so that I hopefully won't, have any regrets.
Wow. There's so many more questions, and this is just one for the road. What do you think your work conveys about being human? You don't have to answer now. We can talk offline about that particular one. Where do you go from here next?
Wow, that is a tough question. I finished a bunch of projects.
Did you?
And so
all right.
I'm at the point right now where I again, we're talking about, we talked about labor earlier and the satisfaction of giving labor. And so to keep up with that analogy, I'm at the point where I'm trying to avoid what I call postpartum depression, where I finished something major and I was used to working on it obsessively all the time. And now it's really done. There's nothing more I can do with that particular project. And so I'm casting about for new things to do. Inevitably, there will be another collection of poems after American Divine that came out in 2021. But there's no rush for that. I almost have enough poems for that now. And so I am actually, yearning for some big new project to work on that can center me and focus my time. And so, I'm very much in the middle phase. And so certainly there will be another collection of lyric poems. And then next, I'm looking for a publisher for that, the book I just finished, which is a series of immersive tours of Central Park in 4 books that go through space and time and talk about true crime and, the history of the park and things like that. It's maybe the most marketable book I've ever written. And I guess that's why I'm having the most trouble publishing it. We shall see.
Where can we purchase your work? Where can we purchase either or, and the rest of your catalog?
And so you can. I have a website, www.aaronpoochigian.com. But since Poochigian is so difficult to spell, it's caused trouble for people in the past. You can also just go to Amazon.com, and you can find. If you type in my name there, you'll get the full selection of my original works and my translations.
Wow. Well, I'd like to thank you for being my guest. I read a review of your work, and the person said that Aaron Poochigian is not as famous as he should be. And I concur. You write incredibly well.
Thank you very much for saying so.
You write incredibly well, and just I recently turned 60, so now I feel that I'm too old to tell lies. So when I say something, I mean it. I want to thank you for being my guest, and I'd like to invite you to come back and grace us again with some more of your work from your next collection. You always have a home here, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Well, to the listeners, as I share with you every time we're together, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, everybody. Good night, Aaron.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at QLPOR.com.